Hi, my name is Indigo. I served in the Navy for 6 years as a surface warfare officer. But the most memorable thing about my time in wasn't my service. It was the forced Pap smear done to me at my commissioning source for no reason at all. Today I'm here to talk about that. I'm here to talk about what happened to me at the Naval Academy. I'm here to talk about the policy behind it and why it doesn't make sense. Well, first, all policy in the Navy comes from the Bureau of Medicine and Surgery. And they say, when it comes to medicine in the Navy, what comes and what goes. So it's the fault of the Bureau of Medicine and Surgery that I was forced to have a Pap smear in order to commission and in order to be qualified for the job that I spent 4 years at the Naval Academy studying for. Let's go over this policy. Manual of the Medical Department, Chapter 15, Section 14. All enrollees at the U.S. Naval Academy who are applying for commission will adhere to one of the following procedures. If a current and complete physical examination is not required for special duty screening, then the following documentation should be forwarded to BUMED qualifications and standards for review. And in number 6, it says the results of a current HIV test, the results of a current Pap smear for females aged 21 and older, and the results of any other test deemed appropriate, and the results of a current, within 1 year of date of submission, dental evaluation. Now, I want to stop and talk about this for a while. HIV, I understand. HIV is highly infectious. It's no more than a blood draw. Okay. Dental evaluation, I understand because I've been on ships and I've heard that if people have dental trouble, it can cause enough of an issue for them where they have to be medically evacuated off the ships during deployment if their dental situation gets bad enough. But Pap smear, one of these things is very obviously not like the other, but I think it was very insidious of them to put it in there sandwiched between these two other things, which aren't sexually invasive like a Pap smear is. Okay. Now that that's out of the way, I want to talk about how this doesn't make sense. You see, this policy here is the only written policy in any of the Navy's manuals that say that women have to get a Pap smear. It's the one upon admittance to the Navy. However, the whole idea behind Pap smears is that it is a screening program, meaning that you're supposed to get one when you turn 21, and then you're supposed to get one 3 years later, and 3 years later, and follow up all the way until you're at the point where you can start getting them at 5-year intervals. However, if you only get them one time, the one time that you're entering the Navy, and you don't get them after that, what's really the point in having an initial Pap smear? A lot of women don't have abnormal cells at age 21 because cervical cancer hasn't had time to develop. Usually you'll see those abnormal cells later at 25 or 30 or some other time along the Pap smear screening pipeline. So also, if this is only in the manual of the medical department when you get into the Navy, it does nothing to test for cervical cancer later on. Meaning that it's up to the Navy's doctors to push and push and push women to get those Pap smears that they don't want to get. And when they're pushing for women to get those Pap smears and violating people's consent, most notably, they're not even going off of any instruction. It's just up to how zealous the doctor is about forcing women to get Pap smears and overriding consent. And that's what usually happens. There's a terrible culture in the Naval Academy and in the Navy of doctors just pushing these on women. Let me share a story. I was still on my first ship. I had gone back to my first ship for a second tour because I had had such a good time there initially. And my ship was stationed in Washington State. And the email came for all of us to get a Pap smear. So I actually kept this email. Let me read it to you so you can hear the sickly sweet tone of it that pissed me off so much at the time. Okay, so the career counselor, the NC1 on our ship at the time, said, "Good morning, ladies. You are receiving this email because you are scheduled for a well women exam. For the exam, Lieutenant blank and HM3 blank will be on board to brief those in this email on their upcoming exam and hand out some pamphlets. They will also be here to answer any questions you may have and ensure that you feel comfortable for your exam. Please let me or the wonderful medical team know if you have any questions or concerns." And then afterwards there's time for the brief, and then there's a scheduled time for all of us to have Pap smears. So the the doctors on the shore side would actually schedule times for every woman on the ship to come in and have a pap smear. Like, they weren't scheduled by us, they were scheduled for us. The doctors were that adamant. And to make it more insulting, they scheduled like 20-minute slots. They expected this to be a quick in and out thing to minimize any resistance that we had to it, and to stop it from becoming a long drawn out thing, because we didn't want them. But anyways, this was the email that was sent out, and I talked to my captain about it at the time, and she actually told me that I was not allowed to tell the other women on the ship that they didn't have to give the exam. She eventually changed her mind, but this was after a long running dialogue with her. She actually helped me out in the end. I think she had just never been confronted with the idea of anyone saying no to these, because women saying no to pap smears seems to be a strange thing in the Navy for some reason, and it has been for a long time. But anyways, what happened was I went to this brief, and I took the questionnaire that the doctors handed me, and I basically looked at it and gave it back to them, and I stayed for the brief, which wasn't a brief at all. They just said, okay, you know what it is, come to your time slots, and that was about it. But I left the questionnaire there, I didn't fill it out, and I walked out, and I never looked back. And that was what it looked like. But I tell you that story to give you an example of how forceful and in your face all this pushing for pap smear screenings is in the Navy. It's frustrating because this is what I spent a lot of my time in the Navy fighting against. It wasn't, sure, some of it was taking care of sailors or doing admin work or learning how to drive the ships, but a lot of energy just went to trying to not be violated. Yeah, a lot of energy just went to trying to not be violated, and that was pretty sad, I thought, when I could have been doing so much more with all of my time. I keep holding this up, and you want to know what this is? This is my resignation. So for officers, it's different than just not re-enlisting another year. We serve at the pleasure of the president, so we have to submit our resignation a year in advance, and it has to be approved by the Secretary of the Navy. So because the pap smear is the reason I resigned, I submitted this policy as my reason for resigning, and this did get approved all the way up to the Secretary of the Navy. So part of me is happy that someone so high up had to look at it and see what I wrote. So what I did write is, after number 6, I was forced to get one even though I didn't want one, and now my body no longer feels like my own. That was my resignation. Another reason the Bureau of Medicine and Surgery's policy doesn't make sense is statistics. So what I have right here is the 2023 demographics report I pulled off of Military One source that shows the ratio of men to women in the armed forces. While it says that 1,642,584 active duty service members were male, 391,796 were female. Now, the lifetime chance of a woman getting cervical cancer is about 1%, and this is taken off the statistics tool on the American Cancer Society's website from the data back in 1970, before screening was widespread, since I assume since pap smear screening started, the rate started to go down. So let's say without screening, the lifetime chance that a woman will get cervical cancer is 1%. So you take 391,796 and multiply that by 0.01, you get 3,918. Okay, so 3,918 of those women will get cervical cancer over their lifetime. But no one can stay in the military for their lifetime. At most will stay in 20 years, and a lot of people will stay in less than that. So let's say half of them will get cervical cancer when they are in the military. So I take 3,917 and multiply that by 1/2. Okay, that's 1,959. Say 1,959 women will get it when they're in the military. But that's assuming a 20-year career maybe, and you have people changing out all the time. So let's assume all these women will get it who will get it in their first 5 years, but let's break that up per year. Alright, so 1,959 divided by 5, that's 392, so about 400. Worst case scenario, you see that the Navy will have to deal with 400 cases of cervical cancer per year, and that's pretty conservative. But wait, there's a better statistic on the American Cancer Society's website than lifetime chance of getting cervical cancer. What is it? Incidence rate. Incidence rate is how many cases of cervical cancer will be seen per 100,000 women. And what is it? 9.7. That means every year, on average, in the United States, out of every 100,000 people, 9.7 women are getting cervical cancer. So let's see what that means for a female population in the military of 391,796. I'm going to take 391,796, divide it by 100,000, 3.92, multiply that by 9.7, 38. 38 cases of cervical cancer per year is what the military is looking at. And for that reason, they've decided to screen the entire female population for 38 cases a year. I don't know what to say.